In today's lecture, I want to talk about planning for biological diversity by enhancing habitat quality. In this lecture, I want to talk about four broad topics. First of all is an introduction to biological diversity. Secondly is looking at different theoretical perspectives on the meaning of biological diversity. Thirdly, I want to look at the role of ecosystem in defining biological diversity. And finally, I want to focus on landscape structure and its relationship to habitat quality. In the introduction to biological diversity, I'd like to talk about first definitions of biological diversity, and then secondly levels of biological diversity, followed by an examination of different factors that create and maintain biological diversity, and finally talking about values. What is it that we get as a result of biological diversity? In defining biological diversity, there are three fundamental questions that need to be answered. A, what is it? B, how do we operationalize its definition for analyzing the Lake Town Township study area? In this class, you're going to be working extensively in an area called the Lake Town Township study area. And so we need eventually over the course of the semester to operationalize biological diversity if we're going to analyze it in the study area for the course. And then finally, how do we integrate these definitions into landscape planning for the area? Definitions of biological diversity focus on the variety of life and its processes. It includes the variety of living organisms, the genetic differences among them, the communities and ecosystems in which they occur, and the ecological and evolutionary processes that keep them functioning, yet ever-changing and adapting. It starts with, but is much more than simply species richness, that is, the diversity of species that are present in a particular ecosystem or landscape. It is the richness of the community and ecosystem, physically, chemically, as well as biologically, as well as the richness of the landscape in which these diverse species and communities thrive. We will use a habitat approach in assessing biological diversity as it comprehensively considers diversity of species as well as conditions and capacity of the landscape to support them. We'll evaluate biological diversity by examining landscape factors leading to its development. Definition of biological diversity includes plant and animal species richness, the number of species types that are present. And this diagram illustrates the number of the types of living organisms that exist on planet Earth and what their relative percentages are. The problem is that we really do not understand the full magnitude of biological diversity on planet Earth, but we are destroying it at an alarming rate. For example, among insects, which account for roughly 56% of known biological species, 80% are known, meaning that 20% of them are unknown. As we find new species, we discover that they are disappearing due in part to habitat removal and destruction that's associated with urbanization, agricultural expansion and intensification, and infrastructure development. In talking about 5 levels of biological diversity, the first level that I want to talk about is the level of diversity that's present within a plant or animal species. For example, we can contrast the genetic diversity within the American elm tree with that of the green ash tree. Both of these are very common street trees that are used in urban environments. The American elm has a relatively low genetic diversity within the species, and consequently, when you see one American elm, you've pretty much seen them all. They all have a vase-like form, and even when grown in an open field situation, as we see in the upper left diagram, the American elm growing in a cemetery, or when growing in a street tree planting, such as we see in Minneapolis in the lower left, the same vase-like form of the American elm is evident. This continuity in form then is attributable to the low genetic diversity that exists within the species. Green ash trees, on the other hand, have a much higher level of genetic diversity within the species, and this is reflected in the quite variable plant form that you'll find. In the upper slide, we see a broad oval canopy, and in the lower right slide, we see a very vertical upright habitat. The diversity among another level of biological diversity is the diversity among particular species within a subpopulation inhabiting a particular habitat patch. This is a complicated phrase that's better explained by looking at the diagram in the lower left. The gray rectangle represents conceptually the concept of landscape. Within landscape, we have two different ecosystems, ecosystem 1, the blue ecosystem, and ecosystem 2, the yellow ecosystem. Within ecosystem 1, we have two different populations. On the right side, population 2, we might call that a population of crows, similar to the crows that we see roosting in the tree on the right-hand side. The population with the species within the other population might be cardinals. Within each of these different populations, we have subpopulations or subsets of species that are referred to as metapopulations. These are groups of birds that tend to hang together and over time live as a metapopulation. So we can talk about landscape then being diverse in terms of the ecosystems that are present, diverse in terms of the populations that are present, and diverse in terms of the metapopulations that exist within a given population. We can also talk about biological diversity in terms of the array of species found within a community, exemplify, or habitat. This is what we refer to as alpha diversity, local diversity, or microheterogeneity. It's exemplified by the diagram on the right, where we can talk about how many discrete species of animals and plants are there within this particular ecosystem. That number, the total diversity of animal and plant species, represents the alpha level of diversity, or the patch's microheterogeneity. Fourth level of biological diversity is change in species composition among multiple instances of the same habitat patch or type. This is called beta diversity, or species turnover. In the slide on the right then, we can talk about two patches of the same type of forest, one patch in the background here and another patch in the foreground. Beta diversity then is about what is the composition of species within the patch in the background versus the composition of species within the patch in the foreground. Finally, we can talk about the diversity of community, ecosystem, or habitat types, that, as well as the diversity of the geographic pattern found within the landscape. This diversity is referred to as macroheterogeneity. And so in the slide on the right, we can talk about an oak forest, a pine forest, a grain field, a hay field, row crop field, farmstead, roadways. These are all discrete ecosystems within the rural landscape. And we can talk about how many discrete ecosystems are there within this particular landscape as a measure of the landscape's macroheterogeneity. Factors leading to the creation and maintenance of biological diversity are varied. One evolutionary factor that I want to talk about has to do with isolation of different ecosystems, leading to speciation, or the evolution of new species. An example of this are the islands of New Zealand, the North Island and the South Island of New Zealand. They are significantly removed from any other significant landmass. We can see where they are relative to Australia. And being isolated as they are, the animal and plant species in New Zealand have pretty much evolved relative to the landscape of New Zealand. And they are what we call endemic to that particular landscape, and quite different than in other continental areas. So isolation leads to speciation and the evolution of new species. There are geologic, geographical, and physical factors that affect the creation and maintenance of biological diversity. Among these are plate tectonics and continental drift. We see this tectonic lift in the lower right-hand side, where a portion of the ocean has literally been lifted up, creating a unique ecosystem relative to the ocean itself, enhancing biological diversity. We can talk about inundation of water, ice, or soil. We can talk about natural catastrophes such as volcanic eruption. Certainly the eruption of Mount St. Helens created a significant disturbance pattern in terms of level and type of biological diversity within the landscape, both immediately after the disturbance and then as the landscape has recovered from the disturbance. We can also talk about the recovery of landscape from fire, as we see in the lower left images. We can also talk about ecological processes that lead to creation and maintenance of biological diversity. Essentially processes such as energy flows among trophic levels, nutrient cycles, and hydrologic cycles affect the location of material in the landscape. So the redistribution of material, nutrients, other matter within the landscape affects the level of biological diversity that's present. In terms of talking about the values of biological diversity, the first set of values we can think about are amenity values. These are values associated with human experience of biological diversity. And on the one hand, we can talk about the scenic value of diverse landscapes, such as we see in this Wyoming landscape with a pond in front of a large mountain. This isolated tree along a bluff landscape, and then the existence values, knowing that there are giant sequoia trees in the country that are hundreds and hundreds of years old and very, very large in scale. We can also talk about economic values associated with, for example, hunting and fishing. Without biological diversity, hunting and fishing would disappear because we'd have pretty much the same fish, the same species of game. And it's through biological diversity then that we have the various types of hunting, the various types of fishing, and we gather the diversity of sport game that come from hunting and fishing. There are medical values associated with biological diversity. Certain plant species produce have medicinal properties that are used in supplements and various kinds of pharmaceutical drugs. Biological diversity leads to ecosystem health and integrity. Resistance to various disturbance regimes involves the capacity of a system to withstand the impact of a disturbance regime. For example, forest retention after an intense windstorm or fire. Resilience refers to the capacity of the disturbance regime the capacity of the community to respond to an encounter with a disturbance regime. Both resistance and resilience are enhanced by a biologically diverse landscape. The last value has to do with the fact that it can be an early warning sign of environmental change. trout fishermen know, for example, that caddisfly larvae and stonefly larvae in the stream is a sure sign of the presence of trout. Similarly, the absence of caddisfly larvae and stonefly larvae in a stream that would ordinarily have those particular species is an indication there's something wrong with this particular stream in terms of its suitability as trout habitat. Finally, we can talk about metapopulation dynamics of trophic level interactions and ecosystem function. Trophic level interaction transfers energy, materials, and nutrients that connect spheres of influence to create ecological process. So the question is then, what happens when one level of one trophic level is removed from the landscape, and what are the impacts of trophic level removal on biological diversity?